Want to speak real English from your first lesson? Sign up for your free lifetime account at EnglishClass101.com.
Lose yourself in the music the moment you want it. You better never let it go. Hi everybody, welcome back to Ask Alicia, the weekly series where you ask me questions and I answer them. Maybe. Please remember you can submit your questions to me at EnglishClass101.com/ask-Alicia. This week's first question is a question from Bahar. I'm very sorry. Hi Alicia, I'd like to learn about as and like. What's the difference between them? To begin with, like is a preposition. Remember, prepositions are words we use to show relationships to other words or to position the elements in a sentence. So for example, at and by and on are also prepositions. The word like is a preposition. However, the word as is a conjunction. A conjunction is a word that connects elements in a sentence. So for example, and, but, or, for, so. These words are conjunctions. That's point one. We use like and as to make comparisons. The general agreement on how to use like and as at this point in time is that if you are following the word like with a simple statement, like a noun phrase, you should use the word like. If, however, the part that comes after the word like or as has a verb in the clause, there's a verb in that part of the sentence, you should use as to do that, because as functions as a conjunction. Remember, it's connecting the elements in a sentence. So we should use like if there's just a simple phrase or a simple noun phrase, something like that, after like or as. So to give some examples, my coworker eats like a pig. In that case, I've used the word like because after like comes a pig. It's just a simple noun phrase. If, however, I said my coworker eats as if he were a pig, I'm using a verb. I'm using the verb were, as if he were. So we can use as in cases where we follow the statement with a verb. We can use like in cases where we follow that statement with a simple noun phrase. Generally, we use them both to make comparisons. I'll say though that native speakers often make mistakes with this. Generally speaking though, especially in spoken conversation and casual spoken conversation, at least American English speakers tend to use like more often than as in everyday conversation. I tend to use like. I rely on like heavily for my comparisons in everyday situations. It's like you were, it's like he was, it's like blah blah blah. As, I feel, is more common, at least among American English speakers, in writing. So you might see as if and as though. Both of those we can use to make comparisons. Like comes before a simple noun phrase. As is used before something containing a verb. Yeah, thanks for that question, Bahar. Next question. The next question is from Taylor. Taylor asks, which one sounds better? I read a newspaper every morning, or I read the newspaper every morning? Nice question. This is a question about articles. This is just about being specific. If, for example, there's a specific newspaper that you want to read, like I read the ABC newspaper every morning, you should use the. If it's not important to you to be specific about a newspaper, and if you want to imply that you just read any newspaper every morning, you can use a newspaper. I read a newspaper every morning. Using the instead, though, shows that there's maybe a specific newspaper. Using the before newspaper in this case, though, sounds like there's a specific newspaper you read every morning. If you say, I read a newspaper every morning, it sounds like you just choose any newspaper that's available to you on that day and you read that newspaper. So using the shows that there's a specific, or it implies that there's a specific newspaper you read every day. You don't have to be specific about which one. You can, like I read the New York Times every day, or I read the Guardian every day, for example. But if you say I read a newspaper every day, it sounds like you don't choose the same newspaper each day. That's the difference between these two phrases. Most people, however, do choose the same newspaper every day, and so they use I read the newspaper every day. You can say I read the news every day as well. But using that set phrase, the news, it's like the news for the day. I read that day's news every day, or I read the previous day's news every day. So usually we say the news. We don't use a news. It sounds a little strange to use a news. So the same sort of thing applies to a newspaper. Most people choose the same newspaper every day, so we say the newspaper instead of a newspaper. But thanks for that question, Taylor. Nice. Next question. Next question comes from Brian. I'm very sorry. Hey Alicia, what's your height? I am 1,000 centimeters tall. Or maybe I'm 6 centimeters tall and this whole thing has just been a scam the entire time. Next question. Next question is from Faris Ghazali. I'm very sorry. Faris asks, hey Alicia, can we use hasn't in an essay? Hasn't, the contracted form of has not. You can. It's physically possible for you to use hasn't in an essay, sure. But if you use contractions in your writing, it makes you, in my opinion, it makes you sound a bit less formal. If you use the expanded form, the non-contracted version, you're gonna sound a bit more formal, a bit more polished, I feel. This does not only apply to the word has not and hasn't, therefore. This applies to all contractions, really. The answer is yes, you can, but I don't necessarily recommend it if you want to sound formal and polished. Thanks for that question, though, Ferris. Next question. Next question is from another person called Taylor. Maybe Taylor submitted more than one question, I don't know. Do these have different meanings? There is not a quiz today, and there is no quiz today. There is not homework, there is no homework. There are not flowers, there are no flowers. They really mean the same things. They communicate the same idea. I would say though, it's more natural not to use an article, but you would not have any communication problem if you said there is not homework today, there is not a quiz today. Thanks for that question though, Taylor. Next question. Next question comes from Ray. Ray asks, hey Alicia, I like rap songs. Is it effective if I learn English by memorizing and singing a rap song like Lose Yourself by Eminem? This is a very specific question. Is it effective? If you only want to learn the English in that song, sure. Using music in media is of course helpful in learning not only words like vocabulary words, but also learning a bit about pop culture from the language that you're studying. In that way, in that respect, yes, it can be effective for learning. However, things to keep in mind. Number one, by studying a song or something like that, you may learn some incorrect grammar, or you may find that the words or the wordplay, the vocabulary words that are chosen are not the words that native speakers use in everyday life, or it's only a speaking pattern that that artist uses, so that's a risk. Two, you might not realize it, but you might study some vocabulary words that are extremely rude or that are not appropriate for you to use. You might sound a bit strange if you use those words. Three, there might be a very limited number of situations where you can actually apply those words. And he's using like little interjections throughout that song, like snap back to reality. Oh, there goes gravity. That's not something that most of us use in everyday speech. If you can keep those points in mind, go for it. I think it's really, really fun to study with something like music and movies because you get to enjoy yourself while you study. I actually used music. That was part of the reason that I got interested in another language was through music. But just keep in mind that the way that you speak and the way your favorite artist speaks may be a little bit different. If you want to learn to speak like Eminem, for sure, you should listen to Eminem's music. But just remember, like, if you sound like Eminem when you speak, it's gonna really surprise a native speaker, and maybe not. It's maybe gonna confuse people. Thanks for that question, Ray. That's really interesting. Okay, so those are all the questions that I want to answer this week. Thanks very much for sending in all your questions. Remember, you can send them to me at englishclass101.com/ask-Alicia. If you like this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel too. If you guys like these videos, then I can continue making them. Also, check us out at englishclass101.com for more good stuff. Thanks very much for watching this week's episode of Ask Alicia. I will see you again next Saturday. Bye-bye. Eminem. It's been a long time since I listened to Eminem. Hey, Eminem, you want to do a collaboration? We can do like a cool pronunciation collaboration. I'll do my pronunciation. His palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy. There's vomit on his sweater already. Mom's spaghetti. He's nervous, but on the surface he looks calm and ready to drop bombs. But he keeps on forgetting what he wrote down. The whole crowd goes so loud he and you can do your pronunciation. Eminem, if you're watching, leave a comment.